Hi all, welcome to Cyber Warfare Lab's AWS Cloud Red Team course. In this module, we will discuss about how we can exfiltrate the informations or data from RDS instance or database. So let's get started. So you can see here, I already configured my CLI with the user which have a sufficient rights to enumerate the information there in RDS. That means the user should have at least list as well as get permissions on RDS services. So what is the first step which we are going to enumerate and how we can move forward to exfiltrate the data? So first thing, because we don't know how many instances are there, let's start. So this is the command which will give the information about all the database instance there in RDS. Okay, so you can see here it will give the information about all the instances there in this particular AWS account. So this is the first instance, and you can see here this is the second instance. Till here this is the information about first instance, and this is the information about first instance. So first instance name is Red Team Public RDS. And what about the another instance? This is the second instance, and this instance name is Red Team RDS. So let's suppose I want to compromise this instance and I want to exfiltrate the data from this instance. So now we are going to information about this instance, and we are going to enumerate the informations as well as exfiltrate the data which is there in this particular instance. So let's see. This is the instance name. Perfect. This is the engine. So it's basically it's a MySQL database. The particular instance is for MySQL database. This is the master username. So suppose if you have if you got the password, you can how you can authenticate it. We'll discuss in our sections. This is the endpoint, or this is the URL, or this is the host name for this particular instance. What else? This security group, we know. We just want to check if it's publicly accessible or not. So you can see here this is not publicly accessible, and how many type of authentication does it support. You can see here password base is by default, and there is one more authentications. IAM database authentication enabled. Yes, true. That means we can authenticate to this particular database using password as well as IAM role based authentications. So let's get started. So we have enough information about this instance. What other information do we need? So we understood that how we can authenticate. We need either a password or as a role which should have sufficient rights to authenticate to this database. Second thing, we don't know where we can access this instance. So you can see here this is not a public instance, so you cannot access this instance outside of VPC. That means you have to compromise the instance, or you have to compromise the services which is running in the same VPC. Services means you have to compromise either Lambda functions, or you have to compromise the EC2 instance which is running in the same VPC where this RDS instance is running. Second thing, you have to enumerate about security groups, because even if you are in the same VPC, we can restrict the accessibility from a certain range of IP address or a particular IP address. So we have to understand about the security groups. So you can see here in this particular database, this is the security group because it's a part of VPC. So this is the security group which is attached to this instance, which you can check what rules is configured and what not. So let's see what is the second thing we are going to enumerate. Second thing we are going to enumerate about security groups, how the rule is configured and who can access this instance. We know that what things you need to authenticate, but how we can access it. So let's copy this one. You have to specify the group ID and you will get the information about the rules. Let's copy this one, open a new tab, paste it here. You have to specify the group ID. It will give the information about this. So this is the group ID. Let's copy this one and paste it here. Why this is really important? Because so basically security group is basically work or act as a virtual firewall. It's basically you can define the rule what incoming and outgoing traffic can be defined. So you can see here, let's see what information I can get it from here. Okay, so you can see here, this is the traffic, and this is for egress traffic, this is the ingress traffic. So you can see here, this is for incoming, this is for outgoing. Basically you can see here, this range can access on this port, and outgoing is all allowed. So that means anybody within this VPC, this is the CIDR range, can access this instance, and only this port is accessible. But we know that MySQL is running on 3306. You can check it from here. This is the port where this instance is running, and this is the host name. So this is the host name you need to to specify, or how you can access from an EC2 instance to RDS instance. But we know that if you are a part of this VPC, or you compromise any service or EC2 instance within the same VPC, you can access it, because it's allow all the CIDR in this particular subnet or particular VPC. So suppose, using pivoting techniques or lateral movement techniques, you can suppose literally move from one VPC to another VPC, or you can pivot from one VPC to another VPC, and you landed in this VPC, and you found that there is one EC2 instance. This is the instance. Suppose you get access of this instance. This instance, let's check the IP address of this particular instance. Okay, let's restart it. So you can compromise by any other method or any other red team operations. But you can see here, this is the IP range. This is the IP address, and this is the IP range we can access it. So that means this VPC or this instance is a part of the same VPC. So that means I can access the instance, RDS instance, from this EC2 instance. So let's check if I'm able to ping this particular host, RDS instance host. So this is the endpoint. Let's see if I'm able to do that. Copy here, paste it here. So you can see here, maybe ping is disabled, but this, you can see here, the resolve IP is this one. Seems like it's a private IP which is there in this same subnet or same VPC. So now I sure that I somehow compromise the instance, EC2 instance, within the same VPC, so I can able to access the RDS instance. Okay, what next? Because we don't have any other information, so let's see what else we can do. We know the information, how we can access it, and how we can authenticate this RDS instance. So authentication method, you can see here, we have by default password based authentication, as well as in this particular instance we have IAM role based authentication. So how we can authenticate using password based authentication, and how we can exfiltrate the data. To authenticate using password based authentication, you need a username as well as a valid password. So suppose this is the username. We already know this is a master username, admin, and password we found found any source code or any other method. So let's check, can we access this instance using these credentials as well as password. So copy this one, copy here, because we can access this instance only from this EC2 instance. Now what is the host name? So let's replace this one from the host name. Host name of the instance which we want to compromise is this one. Now username we already know, or we already enumerate, is admin. This is a super admin, but you can also enumerate, and you maybe found any other username which is there in database. When you create the database, you can create a username there. But this is the master username, and port is by from this information, this is the port where this particular host is running, or this particular instance is running. So if it's a MySQL, by default it's running 3306, and you have to specify the password. So let's specify the password here. Okay, now let's specify the password. So you can get the password information using credential access phase or any source code or any other method. So you can see here I'm successfully able to authenticate this RDS instance. You can see here you can use the same MySQL commands to get all the information. So to authenticate it, I'm using MySQL client. Now I specified the host name, which is there in this instance. This is the port number. This is the host name or endpoint. This is the port number. This is the user, master user, or you maybe get information about any other user which is there in the source code or in configuration file, and one password. You can see all the informations. You can dump all these things using command line utility. So this is how you can exfiltrate the information, or you can authenticate to a database and exfiltrate all the database related information using this relational database or MySQL database. So this is how you can authenticate using password-based authentication method if you found a password or credentials in a source code or any other methods. Now what about if role-based authentication is enabled? How we can authenticate without any password? So suppose to authenticate using a role-based authentication method, role is basically attached to any of AWS services. Maybe it can attach to EC2 instance, or it can be attached to a Lambda functions or any other services. So let's see, this is the EC2 instance, which is basically suppose serving a application. So basically it's an application server. In the backend we are using the database. So this application server is used, or it's basically able to connect to the RDS. But how? If we specify the password, it can connect to the password, but this is not a secure way, because password is stored in configuration file, and if somebody compromises one case, they can see the password. Second thing, we can define the role, or we can attach the roles to this particular instance, that this instance can connect to the RDS. There may be a chance that we have a proxy, database proxy, which sits between your EC2 instance as well as RDS instance. So all authentications can take care by this RDS proxy. But in our case, there is no proxy. So let's see what are the role is attached to this particular instance. So this is the command, which basically get the information what are the roles, or who this particular user is, or particular role is. So let's paste it here. This is the account number, this is the user ID, and this is the role basically attached to this instance. When we talk about EC2 instance, definitely there will be a role which is attached to this one if you are able to view these things. So this is the role. You can see this is the role RDS EC2 connect. This is the role which is attached to this instance. Then what next? What we are going to enumerate next is what are the policy, or what are the permissions is there in this particular role. So let's check. So this will give the information about all the attached policy to this particular role. So let's see. We know the role name. We know the role name, and we know the policy. So for this purpose, I'm using this command line utility, not this EC2 instance, but because this EC2 instance cannot, there may be possibility doesn't have a list rights or list permissions or get permissions. Why? Because it's only can generate the token, but cannot have a list or get permission. But my user, which I compromised have the sufficient permissions. So let's copy this one. Let's copy the name from here. So this is really important. You should understand about what permission is attached to what roles or users, then you can enumerate it or you can get the information from there. So in our case, this EC2 instance does not have or there is no policy which is attached to this instance that can allow you to get the information, a list or get permissions there. But in our case, these users that we already compromised have a sufficient right to enumeration, all these things. But EC2 instance can have rights to authenticate, can generate a token and can authenticate. But this user doesn't have this thing. So there may be chance because certain permission you will get from any other source, certain permission you will get from the other source. So you can combine all these operations and it will become in your enumeration phase. Once you enumerate, you can do all this activity and you will perform your red team operation very efficient manners. So let's copy the role name from here. Let's copy this one. Okay. So these are, there is only one. So this is the policy which is attached to this particular role, and this role is attached to this EC2 instance. Let's see what are the permission there in this particular policy. So the next command will give you the information about the permissions defined in these policies. Now you have to specify the policy version or ARN as well as version. So by default there will be version 1, but if you are updating the policies, it will be change the version. So it basically override the version, not override, it will change the version. So suppose if you have a permissions, which initially when you create you have a permission or all the permission which is there in V1, if you change the permission, it will basically not the override the version 1, but it will create a version 2, and whatever changes you did in there in version 2, but it will not override the version 1. So this is really important to check all the version, but for here I just I have only one version, so you can enumerate what version you have and you can see what are the permissions there. So let's see, I have only one version, and this there you can specify the policy ARN. So this is the policy ARN, you can specify there. Copy this one, let's paste it here. Okay, so this will give you the information, get policy version. That means this will give the information about the permission that this role has. Why? Because the role means this policy have, and this policy is attached to this role, and this role is attached to EC2 instance. So this is how this all the cycle will make. So you can see here this role have this permission, RDS DB connect. That means if you have this permission, you can authenticate to the specified database as well as the specified user. But here in resource actions, I have a star. That means I can authenticate to any database which is there or any instance as well as any users. I'm talking about the database users is there. So here you can authenticate to any user as well as any database. And this is, if this permission is there, you can generate the token. So once you have a token, this particular database and particular users, you can authenticate without a password. So you need this, or role need this permissions, RDS DB connect permissions. Okay. You can also see if I'm doing all this thing, this get operations, this get policy version from the EC2 instance, you won't able to see because there is no policy which you define you have a list or get rights there in RDS, but you have this RDS DB connect rights. That means you can generate the token and you can authenticate it. Now, how we can generate the token? So this is a command which is used to generate the token. To generate the token, you should specify the host name, the port, username as well as region. This is really must. Region should be defined must. So if you have these information, and as well as you need the permissions, RDS DB connect. If you have these things, you can generate the token, which will be valid for 15 minutes, and this will be work like a password. So let's copy this one, because we can only generate this thing from this EC2 instance, because role is attached or permission is attached to this instance. So let's paste it here. So in my case, I have this instance in US East 2. Now you have to specify the username. You can get the information. So here you have to specify the database user. You will get the information using source code or configuration file or any other method. Once you have a user information, you can get it from here. So let's change this one. Let's specify my DB user. Suppose this is the user which I found from the source code or configuration file. Here you have to specify, change this one. Here you have to specify the port 3306. Let's change this one also, because sometimes here you have to specify the host name. Host name means database endpoint. So I can copy the database endpoint from here. This is the endpoint. Paste it here, and that's it. Let's see if I'm able to generate this. Okay, let's specify the region. Yes. So you can see here I'm successfully able to generate the token. Now how we can use this token to authenticate to this particular database? So I generate the token. Now this is the command, which is basically MySQL. I am using the MySQL client, same like hostname, username, port, and here you have to specify the user. This is the user and this is the password. So instead of password, I define the token. So this is the same command which we use to authenticate using password base. So this is the same command you can see here. When I try to authenticate using password base, so instead of password, I specify the token here. So let's see. So what I'm going to do, I'm just copy this token in a token field. Okay, so suppose this is the command I use to generate the token. I store the token in token variable. It will store the token in token variable. Let's see what is data in there in token variable. Seem like it's contained the token, temporary token. So you can see it's contained the temporary token, which will be valid for 15 minutes. Now how we can use this token to authenticate to database? Let's clear this one. Use the same MySQL command. This is basically MySQL client command which is used to authenticate to. Now so token there is token variable. Let's see. Okay, fine. Port, I can specify here the port 3306. Username that we compromised or that we saw there in source code or configuration file, my DB user. Here you have to specify the hostname. So hostname is basically the instance ID or endpoint URL. Let's copy this one. Let's paste it here. So these are the information you need. You no need to specify the password. Let's see if I'm able to authenticate using this token. Yes, you can see here I successfully authenticated this particular instance, MySQL database. Let's see how many databases are there. So you can use the same MySQL command line utility to exfiltrate the data, exfiltrate the table, and dump all the information which is there in this database. So this is how you can authenticate using IAM based authentications or IAM role authentications to enumerate the informations or exfiltrate the data from RDS instance. So this is, you can see here I am successfully able to exfiltrate the data from this database without any password. There may be a chance that you found or you will familiarize with DB proxy, database proxy. So once if you have information about database proxy and you have a sufficient right to access this proxy, you can authenticate to database without any password or credential, because all this thing can take care by database proxy. So this is how you can exfiltrate the information. So this is all about this video. Thank you so much for watching this video.